Okay, time to talk about the hottest game. No, not that one. No, not that one either. That would have been a good idea. No, not that one. Is that too soon? When I wrote this script, this game still was active, so that aged poorly. Okay, that's the one. Yeah, the literal hottest game ever because it's hell, I guess. That's right. I'm talking about a game that half released in 2018, then became fully playable in 2020. Why? Well, because recently the beta for Hades 2 became public, and I remembered that I never got around to actually finishing the first. So I wanted to see if Hades, now Hades 1, was worth revisiting in 2024, even with the release of Hades 2 ostensibly coming within the next year. So let's talk a little bit about how Hades came to be. In 2018, Supergiant announced and released Hades into early access. But before Hades, Supergiant had released 3 other games: Bastion in 2011, Transistor in 2014, and Pyre in 2017. And each subsequent release of a new game from the studio showed that Supergiant was a studio you were going to want to keep an eye on. None of their previous 3 games reviewed on the level of, say, Portal 2, which scored a 95 on Metacritic and was released the same year as Bastion, and holy smokes, you're telling me Portal 2 is 13 years old? Okay, regardless, all of the games that Supergiant released up until this point reviewed in the mid-80s on Metacritic, which is a good score for the individual games, but it's a great score when you talk about making 3 different games, which all in all took 9 years to develop, all averaging around an 85 on Metacritic. That shows consistency from Supergiant and demonstrates that they weren't just a one-off game studio. These guys had something to prove. In the documentary made by NoClip, the creators of Hades tell how their journey from those games led them to ultimately make Hades. And when you look at Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, you can see how these games may have influenced Hades, making Hades the swan song of Supergiant when it was released. Before Hades was released, it was launched into early access, as I mentioned earlier, and the reception was immediately positive. It was definitely unfinished, and Supergiant still had a long ways to go, but you could tell the foundation for a great game was there. This early access period was really important to the development and the success of Hades, since Supergiant had never quite done anything like this before, and they were actively listening to feedback, trying to improve the game around player response, something that can be very difficult and dangerous, and it has led to the ultimate downfall of many other games. Hades finally left early access on the 10th of December in 2019, and man, did it show how much passion, creativity, and thoughtfulness Supergiant put into the development of their game.
Few tales are told of Hades, whose very name inspires fear and penitence, reminding us of the inevitable fate which we all share. I, however, mean to tell you such a tale. Listen carefully.
So for like the 10 of you watching this video who haven't actually played Hades, what is it? It's a narrative-driven roguelike dungeon crawler where you battle your way out of the underworld of Greek myth, defying the god of the underworld himself. And those aren't my words either. That comes directly from Greg Kasavin, creative director for the game itself. And I don't think that I've ever played a game that's executed so well on exactly what it aims to be. Hades is a great roguelike, one of the best I think I've ever played. It's a great dungeon crawler with some of the tightest combat of any dungeon crawler I've ever played. And the story it tells is one that's unmatched in its genre category. You see, in Hades, you play as Zagreus, the son of Hades. Not Hades. It's got a whole Zelda thing going on with not playing as the title character, I guess, but anyway, you play as Zagreus. Zagreus, being your main protagonist, is a brilliant idea of Supergiant. If you make this so that you play as any other Greek god or goddess, I don't think the narrative and subsequently the game land as well as it does. There just isn't a ton of lore about the son of Hades and Persephone, whereas someone like Hades himself, or Zeus, or Persephone, or Aphrodite, or Dionysus, or insert almost any other Greek mythological character here, they all have molds that they have to fall into. Zagreus does not. His story is a blank canvas. canvas, and this story takes place exactly where it needs to. All the crap that's gone down between all the gods, that's already happened. You're just dropped in, and Zagreus says he's gonna find a way out, he's gonna find his mom, and he's gonna find out why things are the way they are now. The narrative unfolds so that each successful run, you learn more about why your mom, Persephone, left. If Supergiant just would have left the narrative as the relationship between you, your mom, and Hades, then it would have been a serviceable story, honestly. But there are many, many, many more characters in this game. Supergiant took the narrative elements of this game and seamlessly wove them into the gameplay elements of what it is to be a roguelike. You are going to die, a lot. But with each death comes a new run, and a new array of dialogue you could get from each character that you interact with. It felt like at least 50% of the time, if not more, each god had a line of dialogue every time I chose one of their upgrades. Seriously, I cannot understate how blown away I was with the amount of dialogue there is from each character and how the lines they say reflect your situation. Like, if you're close to dying after you clear a room and you choose an upgrade from a god, one of them will say like, "Barely made it through that one, huh? Let's see if I can help you out." Or you can be carrying a certain weapon, say the shield, and Zeus will say something like, "Oh, I see you're carrying the shield of shieldiness there. I remember that weapon well. I hope you use it better than the previous owner." That's not actually what he's going to say, but I didn't write the dialogue in this game.
The rail of adamant itself has found its way into your hands, cousin. A malignant thing if you were to ask me, and not one I would ever use myself. Unless perhaps I had no other choice. I suppose it must have been that way for you.
Okay, pause real quick. I took time to look up some dialogue stats about Hades for the video, and I'm legitimately blown away because I found this little infographic tweet from the developer of the game. This game has a total of 30 voiced characters, a word count of over 305,000 words. For reference, this video, that is a little over 20 minutes long, only has 4,000 words in it. There's this character, Tisiphone, who pretty much only says murder. And she has 190 voice lines. Another character, Charon, who pretty much just like groans, has 120 voice lines. This is truly unbelievable. That right there really demonstrates the breadth and responsiveness that this game has when it comes to the characters. The writing and technical work that went into making each person respond to your situation not only is unique to the roguelike genre, but I don't know that I've ever played a game that's had such a responsiveness and dialogue to my situations. But also keep in mind that I say that having not played Baldur's Gate 3 yet. On top of having great responsive dialogue, the gods are all wonderfully portrayed and voiced, each one having a distinct personality that shines through when the writing is combined with the superb voice work. Not to mention the absolutely incredible artwork on full display here for each of these characters. I mean, look at them. You've got Zeus, Aphrodite. Wait, can I show this on YouTube? Hermes, Charon, Dionysus. Can I show this on YouTube? Primordial Chaos. I mean, one of my favorites. This guy looks absolutely incredible. Athena, Ares, they're all a treat to look at. Not just the characters either, but the actual regions and the way they're brought to life in a dungeon crawler. The River Styx, Asphodel, Tartarus. Do yourself a favor, and after you clear a dungeon, take some time to look at the edges of the screen, not just your character. I think someone could easily miss the environmental artwork that is squeezed into every frame of this game. If Hades weren't a game, it could easily fit into a storybook with how detailed the underworld looks here. If you're really into Greek mythology, there is a ton for you to love. I don't think any other piece of media quite portrays these characters the way Hades does. Sure, other pieces of media have done a great job, but just the sheer cast of characters here, along with the seamlessly unending amount of dialogue that is well written for each character, make each and every one of them come to life in a way that I haven't seen before. If you're not into Greek mythology, that's okay. In Hades, you can catch yourself up by reading these logs in the game about literally everything you come across. Seriously, there's one for the fish that you catch in the game. Each god has their own log to help you learn more about them, and it progressively unlocks the more you play the game. But if you don't want to read this though, you don't have to, since as I said earlier, they're already brilliantly portrayed in the writing and acting themselves. Before playing Hades, I didn't know much about Greek gods, having pretty much only watched Hercules, and I actually did see the musical Hades Town, which does serve as a good precursor for this story. Go ahead and do yourself a favor, just look up story synopsis, you don't need to listen to it, it's good stuff. But now I can tell you who the god of war is, or that there's a goddess of hunting, or there's a god called Dionysus, and he likes to party, man.
Heard you wrestled with some satyrs near the surface, Zach. Nice work making it that far, and I just want to let you know that they are definitely not my crew, man. Satyrs I know aren't like that at all.
These may just seem like insignificant facts, but it's all stuff that was told to me organically through these characters and my interactions with them. Not to mention all the characters you interact with once you die, like Achilles or Megara. There's some of your closest confidants or your long-lasting rivals in the game. Where the Olympians provide much more one-sided dialogue, the characters you interact with back in the House of Hades, your home, you have a relationship with them, and their story progresses as you progress the game. Now, while you technically do finish the narrative after completing so many runs, there is an extensive epilogue that feels like it could be longer to complete than the original storyline itself, and it feels just as substantial, continuing to give you more reasons to play the game. In a roguelike, you play, you die, and you repeat. In most roguelikes, you do it for the thrill of the gameplay. In Hades, the narrative is almost as important as the actual moment-to-moment combat itself. It gives you a reasonable story as to why you're trying to escape hell. Zagreus wants to go see his mom, but Hades, your dad, is having none of it, leaving you to try and get out the painful way. As I said earlier, traditionally, roguelikes are built centrally around their gameplay. Before playing Hades, I'd played and at least completed one run of The Binding of Isaac, Dead Cells, and Returnal, just to name a few. Each of these games have their own unique combat style. Isaac is a really floaty top-down shooter. Dead Cells is a fast and tight 2D action platformer. Returnal is a third-person bullet hell game. In each of these games, there is some sort of progression. Most of the time, that progression is unlocking new weapons or items that you can use in your subsequent runs, letting you increase your weapon variety and consequently unlocking better firepower to deal with the obstacles ahead of you. But in all of those roguelikes, you are subject to what the RNG gods give you. You don't get to pick your weapon, really, unless it's given to you by chance. You don't get to choose what upgrades you get, and there's no real character progression. Hades flips the roguelike formula on its head. There is character progression that actually rewards you for dying and trying again, whereas the other games mentioned, you kind of just have to get better and learn the mechanics yourself. You also get to choose what weapon you start with, and while you can't pick exactly what upgrades you'll get along your run, you certainly have control over what kind of perk you'll get. I'll kind of talk about this later. Hades gives the player control over how they want to play. Let's just start with weapons. There are 6 of them, each of them feeling very unique to one another. There's weapons you'd expect in a game about a dude trying to break out of the underworld, for example a sword or a spear, but then you start unlocking some more unique ones like a freaking gun? And despite you getting to choose your starting weapon, playing the game doesn't get overly boring or repetitive, due to the thrill of you hoping that you get the right combination of upgrades for your weapon of choice. In other roguelike games, you might be aiming to get a particular weapon for your run. In Hades, you're hoping to get the right upgrade, which comes from the Daedalus hammer, that significantly alters one aspect of your weapon. You can get an upgrade that lets you swing your sword way faster, but you deal a little bit less damage, or an upgrade for your spear that lets you charge up your spin attack at a fraction of the time that it usually takes to do so. Each of these weapons are unique in their own way, but when you combine these weapons with 1 or 2 upgrades from the hammer, of which there are about 12 upgrades for each weapon, they become something almost entirely different, again making each run unique for each weapon despite giving the player the choice to use the same weapon no matter how many times their heart desires. Which is where the combat in Hades really shines, the crazy combinations that you can get. As I mentioned earlier, each Olympian god gives you boons, which are upgrades to one tool in your arsenal. Each boon corresponds to what that god does, so Aphrodite will make foes weak, Poseidon will push foes back with his water, and Zeus will use lightning. On their own, these upgrades are really cool. As you progress your runs, you'll gather more boons, making you more and more powerful. So like I mentioned earlier, you can get an upgrade for your sword that makes you swing your sword much faster. But then you can get an upgrade from Zeus, where every time you attack, you also strike foes with lightning. As you play the game, you learn how more of these upgrades can synergize with each other, which I would say is pretty standard for most roguelikes. But where Hades goes the extra mile is adding specific duo boons. Essentially, the gods will interact with each other and form a super powerful upgrade that is almost always worth picking up. Like this one, called Stubborn Roots, where if you have no more lives left, essentially, you will regenerate health for every second that you're in battle. On top of this, the game will give you what it calls keepsakes, and the ones that the gods give you ensure that you find a boon specifically from that god. Again, giving you more agency over your run than any other roguelike game gives you. Now what could happen when the player gets enough experience is they find some broken combination, then go for that every single time. Hades solves this in a couple of ways. The first being this fated list of prophecies. This is essentially a list of almost everything you can do in the game, and heavily incentivizes you to complete everything on the list. For me, this encouraged me to get away from the Athena Dash boon, or Divine Dash. This boon is really my biggest complaint about the combat, and really about the game. In Hades, you have such good build variety, but I completed way more runs when I had even one Athena boon, particularly this Divine Dash boon, which reflects incoming projectiles every time I dash, than whenever I didn't have this Athena boon, and whenever I didn't, the game became much harder for me. But this fated list of prophecies really encouraged me to get at least every boon that each god offers, and every duo boon at least once. After rolling credits, and even doing 4 or 5 runs after the credits, I still have 1 or 2 boons to find for each god, and like 7 more duo boons to find, maybe more. Granted, I probably could have been a lot closer to collecting every single boon, but I kept going for that dang Divine Dash boon. Regardless, the fated list of prophecies is one way the game encourages build diversity. The other way is with this mechanic called Dark Thirst for your weapons. Dark Thirst essentially gives you more of an essential item that you need to upgrade your character, that item being called Darkness. The weapon which has Dark Thirst applied to it changes every time you die, so you're heavily incentivized to play each run with a different weapon that you didn't play with before. Which leads us to another point where Hades deviates from the traditional roguelike formula that I briefly mentioned earlier. You can actually upgrade your character. There's a mirror that you can put Darkness into for character upgrades, and these upgrades are significant, like an extra dash, finding rare boons, or gaining more gold, more HP, even being able to die multiple times during your run. It's elements in this game, like this mirror, or a story that's cohesive, an impressive cast of characters to drive the narrative, an agency that you have over your weapons, and your build variety that make dying in this game really not so bad. I'm always a little disappointed when I die, sure, but when I walk out of the pool of sticks and immediately see a little exclamation point for me to interact with, I want to know what that character has to say to me, how I'm going to progress their story, what they're going to say, if it's funny or if it's interesting, or what it has to do with where I'm at. After I talk to all the characters that I can in the House of Hades, progressing each story that we have on our own, I then go to the mirror to upgrade Zagreus, or turn in a fish that I caught during my run to the chef. And by the way, I love this chef. I would absolutely die for him, and I do many times. Or I could purchase an upgrade from the house contractor to, say, unlock a room that has a healing fountain in it, where I don't have to fight any enemies. All of these make dying somewhat of a relief. I get to choose my upgrades, then try again. Then I finally beat the game, and once you finally beat the game, you unlock the Pact of Punishment, which allows you to play the game with more variety and makes your escape attempts much harder, but gives you key rewards if you manage to beat the boss again. And this is where I started to hit a wall with Hades, actually. This roguelike is better than every single one I have played before in terms of systems and feeling of progression. But after I unlocked almost all of the upgrades the mirror offered and beat the game with all the weapons, it became kind of grindy to me. The reason for this is that each of your weapons have aspects or varieties to them, which impact the way all of your weapons play. Take this aspect of the spear. It makes it so that your spin attacks mark enemies to take more damage. To unlock the first level of this spear, you need to first collect 2 Titan's Blood. which is a currency you get in the game by beating some bosses. You need to invest those 2 Titan's Blood into the weapon itself, then upgrade the spear further by investing more Titan's Blood. First 2, then 3, then 4, and so on. There are 4 different aspect types, all needing Titan's Blood to upgrade. When you beat a run once with a certain weapon, you can't get any more of that upgrade material, and so you have to increase the difficulty in order to earn more of it. Once I got to this part of the game, where darkness wasn't as valuable and I was really out for some of these more rare currencies, I kind of started to struggle with Hades. You don't need to try and get more Titan's Blood to unlock the entire narrative, but you do need to play with more difficulty if you want to unlock all the weapon types. So when I started going for these different weapon aspects, the game became significantly harder and I wasn't improving as much. I just kept dying over and over again, which admittedly is a me problem. That is until I turned on God mode, and holy smokes, my enjoyment was immediately reignited for this game. You see, I played Hades back in 2020 on Switch actually, and hit this exact same wall before, but somehow entirely missed this setting. This God mode setting is essentially a difficulty scaler to the player, and it dynamically changes the difficulty based on how much you are struggling with the game. It starts at a 20% damage reduction, and each time you die, that damage reduction is increased by 2%. And here's the thing about Hades is that it is a hard game. Even with this turned on, I still died, ultimately leveling my God mode setting up to 26%. But when I got it to 26%, I found the game much more manageable but still challenging. It didn't ruin the game by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, for me, it made it more fun, and I now found going for Titan's Blood not as scary. I could unlock the narrative of the story, and I still felt a challenge while increasing the heat. This is seriously the best difficulty scaler that I have ever played in any game, hands down. The only drawback really is there is no way to reset your damage reduction after you accrue it. So if you die and increase it, but say now the game feels way too easy, you can't knock it back down to 20%, which would have been nice. But what I found myself doing is once I hit that 26% damage reduction, and when I found myself about to die, I would just pause the game real fast, turn God mode off, then play until I died, which usually happened nearly immediately after unpausing the game, to avoid hitting a 28% damage reduction. This setting can literally be toggled at any point on the fly during your run. You just pause the game and go to this setting and either check or uncheck the box. The devs of Hades want you to play and enjoy their game, so if that means turning on God mode so you can play and beat the story, experiment with different builds, or just sit back and play and enjoy the game, then do it. There is nothing wrong with that. There is also Hell mode, I should mention, and that just makes the game more challenging, but I was way too chicken to try and turn this on, so I can't really speak to it. I don't know that I've ever played a game with as much difficulty adaptability as I have Hades. It can either be one hell of a hard game, pun intended, or it can be a game where you sit back and enjoy the ride. All of these elements, the characters, dialogue, artwork, combat, build variety, and difficulty adaptability make Hades a practically perfect roguelike game. Oh, and I haven't even talked about the music. The music is really just the cherry on top of an already excellent game. It will start with a softer melody from a single instrument, often a lyre, then seamlessly transition to this synth metal vibe as you face a harder room or a boss. If you've enjoyed either of the songs used in this video, you've enjoyed just a small sample of what the music composition is on offer here. This is why you should still play Hades in 2024, even with Hades 2 in early access and seemingly maybe releasing around the corner. Hades is a masterclass in indie gaming. It's a masterclass in gaming in general. The devs truly executed what they set out to do here, and you owe it to yourself to play this game at least once, or even play it again if you don't want to play the early access version of Hades 2. It is that much worth your time. That's it. Thanks for listening to this one. Sorry it took a while to get out. I got like deathly sick in the middle of this, and you might even be able to hear it in the recording a little bit. If you haven't, consider subscribing, or leaving a like, or leaving a comment, or all three. Lots of people did all three in the last video. That was awesome. I'm not expecting this to do maybe as good as the last one, but hey, anything helps. It helps me boost my morale, helps me to know that some people are enjoying this out there, which is wild to me. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you in the next one.
Here's something for the show. Listen to me. I don't know how else to put this, but I want you to come home voluntarily. It's not just you swept up in all this nonsense now.